there's two sides to every coin. Then there's a conversation you can join. But I'm an old dog and there's new tricks. And some of my opinions you just can't fix. 'Cause I'm an old man yelling at the sky. I'ma shake my fists at the clouds and cry. Get off my lawn, you snowflake, before I have a meltdown, breakdown, shakedown. 'Cause this is my hometown, so back down, sports clown. It's all just a game, and it's the last down, let down, cowtown. I said it's all just a game. I give the touchdown, the rundown, the lowdown. 'Cause it's over the game. Gonna crack down and shut down the sundown. I said it's all just a game.
Happy Friday to you, kids. It's just a game, as the theme says it. I love that song, by the way. Get off my lawn, you snowflake. I would be me. You would be you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for stopping by. If it's live, hello right now. If it's podcast a little later, hello then. We got a good show for you today. A great show. We got the show for you today. This is the one, if you're just joining us for the first time, this is the podcast to hear. We got a lot to cover. Vicki Hall is going to join us live in the Oodle Noodle studio in hour number 2. Dear friend, but more importantly than that, we are going to celebrate the fact that she is going into the Canadian Football Hall of Fame and become, in the media section, it becomes the first woman to be honored by the Canadian Football Hall of Fame, which is not new territory for Vicki. We will get into that with her in just a couple of minutes. Our speaking of dear friends, Eric Duhatschek from The Athletic will join us. So much to talk about with Eric. Couple things. Dysfunction on display. That seems to be the theme. The Flames losing a critical game at home 3-2 to Vegas last night, a game in which they chased most of it. Very quiet building until towards the end. I thought Jacob Markstrom gave you a quality start. Your inability to score based on your shot production remains a bit of an issue, but controversy abounds. Towards the end of the game, down by a goal, the goalie comes out and Daryl Sutter has his fourth line on the ice. Later, and Daryl did talk about this today, so credit the reporters at practice. They have been explaining this, that he felt they were getting killed in the face-off circle. So people wondering why no Jonathan Huberdeau out there late in the game, but he said that he had, well, he didn't say, he did say it, but he had two centermen. He had Backlund and Lindholm out there. But there's no doubt there remains some sort of disconnect here between the club, the coach, the general manager, the owner. It's not firing on all cylinders. 27th one goal loss of the year. 27th. They play San Jose tomorrow. Somebody smarter than me has calculated their playoff chances at 6%. Okay. We might get into this a little later on, but there was a moment in time in that third period in which they were down 2-1, and then Roy, who got the go-ahead goal for Vegas, stuck his arm in. Definitely was a hold on Rasmus Anderson, and this is not an attempt to complain that there was a non-call, but it got me thinking about: do you earn those? Do you get those? You get the benefit, or do you kind of eliminate those opportunities by yapping too much? And that's one thing. I have not been in the building a lot at all this year. One of the things that you don't see watching on television is things that happen between whistles. I don't know if this is a Flames team that is a pain in the ass to work with if you're an official. If they're always in your ear, if they're always complaining, if they're always after you, after a while, that stuff can start to drag on you. 2 goals last night that were waved off. I think we would all make arguments that they were the right calls. I don't think that was it. And then that call, but no break in there. Do you earn your breaks? Do you deserve your breaks? Do you get breaks? There's always that conversation of luck. And I think sometimes you create your own luck. The NHL has created a quagmire. They have another team that refuses to participate in their Pride event by wearing their Pride jerseys. Last night in Florida, the Panthers wore theirs, but the two Stahl brothers sat that one out. Want to show you one. This was interesting. That not only the Stahls, and they explained why, but they said they weren't going to talk about it. Eric Stahl was asked after the game, and he said he's never worn a Pride jersey. This picture begs to differ, as that was Mr. Stahl when he was with Montreal wearing a Pride jersey. The gate's open. There's now cover for the cowards. There's now cover for those who want to, point at religion or point at whatever reason. But basically, they don't want to participate and support a group. This, again, we keep saying this. Go back to the Bain Pettinger interview from the CAA representative, player agent, but also from the Alphabet Sports collective. He talked about it as a gay man. What is the Pride Night is now becoming more of a hindrance than anything. I'll do one negative and I'll do one positive. Then I'm going to get to Eric. Here's my negative. Where the hell is the National Hockey League in all of this? Where? I'll tell you what's going to happen. There will not be Pride games next year because the NHL will not allow themselves to go through this and not. You have to show a bit of a spine right now, and the NHL is not showing one as a collective league. Again, take the lead from Brian Burke. This is not a recruitment tool. This is just allowing, and it's particularly nauseating to me because I think there's young kids out there who are struggling in their teenage years and looking for something to grasp onto as they deal with their true selves. And then they see this, and now the Eric Stahl, wow, for religious reasons, we have more. Well, you have. And I think there's been some really compelling cases that I have Mormon family. I've gone to their house for dinner. I have said grace with them prior to dinner. I did not have a Coke Zero because they don't believe in that and they don't have that. But guess what? I didn't drink it because it wasn't there. I had fun. I participated in their grace when they said it, but it wasn't a recruitment thing. It was me respecting them. I don't want to go too far down this path. Where's Gary Bettman? Where's Kim Davis in this? Where's Kim Davis in this? Seen a lot of Kim Davis on magazine covers. I've seen a lot of articles about Kim Davis. This falls right under, as vice president, this falls right under her privy in the National Hockey League. Okay, that's the bad. Here's the good. He used to be here for most of his career, but he's now in Florida. Here's Matthew Tkachuk after the game last night.
Tonight, for me, really is just all about including everybody, and it's to my opinion, it's by far the greatest game in the world, and everybody's welcome in my locker room, and in our locker room as an organization, I think our organization's done an unbelievable job of showing that and embracing that, and starting from Vinny all the way down to the players. So continuing the tradition every year and showing each and every day that hockey is for every single person. We welcome everybody.
That is how you lead. That is a leader. We are broadcasting today live from Treaty 7 territory, and this program, of course, goes without saying, is welcoming to all, and it's inclusive for everybody. Everybody's welcome here, including our dear friend from The Athletic, Eric Duhatschek, is kind enough to join us here on a Friday. Mr. Duhatschek, how are you, sir?
I'm okay. How about you?
Well, we'll get a little off to start the program, a little fired up. The local heroes have a little controversy. The league has a little controversy. It's never dull in the old National Hockey League in these parts.
Well, it's funny you should mention that because our lives are governed by the timetable of the National Hockey League, and you always hope once you get past the trade deadline and before you get into that week to 10 days before the playoffs, when you're getting your previews done and so on and so forth, that there is a little bit of a lull there, so you can kind of not have the foot on the gas pedal as much as you do the rest of the season. But as you say, it's never dull, and I took in the Flames game on Tuesday night, and what a Jekyll and Hyde group, because that night they looked really good, and they beat a top goaltender. Like, to me, one of the most underrated goaltending seasons that we've seen this year is from John Gibson in Anaheim, because he's just been exceptional. I know he stole a game against the Flames earlier in the season, but that has happened time and time again. When Gibson brings his level up to what it can be, he's, top 5 in the game for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So, afterwards, I, tried to engage Daryl Sutter a little bit about, could this get the ball rolling? And you never had the, like, no one wanted to commit to that. No one wanted to commit to, at some point it has to start somewhere. And it could have started with a win on Tuesday. And then, last night there's essentially a 4-point swing. Winnipeg comes into Anaheim and squeaks one out. They didn't look great, but it looks like now they've created enough of a cushion between themselves and the Flames, with games running out and Winnipeg having the tiebreaker, that it really feels as if this, last night is the end, and that now from here on in, it's just a matter of what do you accomplish in these final 3 weeks of the season, and then how do you sort out what went wrong and how do you fix it? And I have to tell you that that's going to involve a lot more organizational soul searching than they've had in a long time. When you think about how complicated last summer was, with the Gaudreau negotiations going down in the wires and the notification from Tkachuk that he wanted to leave, and then how they moved the personnel around and got it to the point where going into the season, I mean, I looked this up yesterday, they were the 4th betting choice for the Stanley Cup on October the 6th. And I don't bet, but I do like the odds, that the bookmakers set, because they strip out all the emotion. They only care where the money is coming in, and so to me, that's real. That's not people who are follow a team and are hoping for the best for the team that they cover. That's a completely separate entity, saying that in their minds, Calgary had the same odds going into the season to win the Stanley Cup as the Tampa Bay Lightning. So fast forward to today, and what happened? And what I saw when I last saw them firsthand is a team that's just a little out of sync everywhere. And all you have to be is a little out of sync everywhere to have the kind of year that the Flames have. One night the goaltending isn't what it should be. The next night the goaltending is pretty good, but you hit too many goalposts. The next night after that, their special teams are better than your special teams, and all of a sudden, we always want to seize on one reason why it's going south, and it would be so easy to solve, I think, if there was just one reason. But here, I think you've got multiple reasons. The best players haven't been the best players. It's a cliche that is true. If you win championships when your McKinnons and Makars play at the level that they can play, when your Hedmans and Kucherovs play at the level you can play, and when those players are worn down or injured or whatever, all of a sudden, you come back to the pack and you're just another NHL team. So, the Flames haven't had that from their best players. Their goaltending hasn't been very good. The special teams have been okay. They've pretty much been a break-even factor. I think that, they need to be better in this organization in order to win, because the whole philosophy that Daryl Sutter has always embodied is, play hard 5-on-5 and then get that one extra goal that wins you the game on special teams. So it's going to be very interesting to see when all is said and done. There'll be, the usual exit interviews, and everyone will be, trying to offer explanations. But I think mostly everybody just needs to go home and reset and think about how they can be better next year. Because whereas 2 years ago we saw the best of most of these players, this year we've seen, if not the worst, then nowhere near the best. And they just have to find a way of collectively and individually being better than they've been.
So you say it's not one thing, it's a bunch of things.
It's everything.
But could it all boil down to, and I'm very respectful of the fact that I have not been in the room, and I am basing this off of comments that have been made by the likes of Elliot Friedman and Chris Johnston and other people who have pointed inside the locker room. Is there any chance that this is harmony, that this is a team with no chemistry? This is a team that just doesn't like playing for the coach, and the coach just doesn't like the players at this point?
Yeah, I think that absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've known Daryl Sutter forever, and he stubbornly believes in a certain number of principles as they relate to how to run a hockey team, and they tend to be like, he's aware of analytics, he's been adaptive to some of the changes in the game, but fundamentally he believes in pushing. And I think it's a philosophy he inherited when he started working with Mike Keenan in Chicago. And Mike Keenan learned that from Scotty Bowman, and it has been a tactic that has worked successfully for all of those coaches and for Darryl. I mean, he's one of the highest, in terms of coaching wins in a career. He is top 10. But I do think that fundamentally, not only has the game changed, but the type of player coming into the National Hockey League has changed. And there was a time, so, I go back to Bob Johnson. So one of the very first coaches that I ever covered. And I remember having a conversation about him about motivation. And the way he framed it in the old days was there's two ways to coach. And remember, this is like 1983, 1984. He said there's coaching from the point of fear and there's coaching from the point of pride. And he cited Scotty Bowman as an example of a coach that coached from the point of fear. And he said it's fear of having your ice time reduced, fear of being in the press box, fear of being put in the minors. And in those days, Scotty was running a very deep Canadians team, and he could take anybody out of the lineup and replace them with somebody that was just as good and win every night. And then he said, and then there's the point of coaching from the point of pride, where you try to instill pride in a group. You instruct, you teach, you try to make everybody better, and you basically make a pact with the player that if you follow my direction, I'm going to make you a better player that will help us collectively win. You will play longer in the National Hockey League, you will make more money. This is the path to take. And then you look around the National Hockey League today, and you still see a handful of coaches. The opposite to Bruce Cassidy on the Vegas bench, I think, falls into that old school category as well. And then you have coaches that adopt a different philosophy. So and both work. That's the thing. Both work. Each has had its level of success. And but I think that if you coach from the former point of view, from the point of fear or pushing, or just driving, that doesn't last as long as coaching from the point of pride. Eventually, every coach's voice, starts to fall on deaf ears. Even the best coaches realize that and understand that. So that's what it's felt like in Calgary. That last year, Darryl came in and everybody played, and responded to his voice. And it looks to me as if, the response that was there last year is not there this year. And partly it's because, there have been, changes in personnel. And so, someone like Johnny Gaudreau, who has had lots of successes with coaches that pushed hard, is out of the dressing room. And Jonathan Huberdeau comes in, and he looks to me like a guy that responds to the carrot, not the stick. And so, so either, the players have to be adaptive, because if they bring Darryl Sutter back next year, which I think is going to happen, then you have to come to terms with, this is who I'm working for. This is the environment that we work in, and let's find a way of making it work.
Can that happen in this day and age? I think it happened previously.
Yeah.
We're in a different society now, right?
Yep.
Like players, the old adage, well, run through the wall. Now they want you to tell them what's in it for them when they run through the wall. They have an agent like a Walsh, and Alan Walsh, that will come out and defend them. Can there be that kind of change, so that you don't have to? It seems to me that if Darryl goes, that would be the sixth coach in since 2013 or something like that.
Sure. And the answer is I don't know, because what a lot of times what happens is that if you brought in a coach that had a similar philosophy but was just a different coach, there is a honeymoon period with every team, and so that philosophy might work if it's a different coach, but if it's the same coach, it's very challenging. It's very challenging. When I think about coaching this year, that I thought that the one curious part of it was if you look at Vegas, Dallas, and Boston, essentially they traded their coaches, right? That was always something that we used to joke about in the old days and even write about occasionally when we wanted to get out on a weird soap opera, that there should be an ability to trade coaches back and forth between teams, because often it's like they're all, anybody that coaches the National Hockey League level is a good coach, because to get to the National Hockey League level, you have had to show your coaching chops at a lower level. So if the starting point is everybody that's in the NHL can coach, why is it that some are more effective than others? And why is it that, eventually even the best coaches, like, I think about Barry Trotz, they just need to go someplace else. And so the solution should be, I'll trade my guy for yours. And that's what happened, right? So, Jim Montgomery, goes into Boston, and he's the complete opposite in terms of personality and approach to Bruce Cassidy. Vegas felt that they needed a firmer hand on the tiller to try and get things back on track, and that's what Bruce Cassidy provides. And then Peter DeBoer goes into Dallas and seems to have found a niche again. So every one of these coaches is good, has had success, and these teams managed to, in an indirect way, without directly trading for each other, switch positions, and then the clock starts fresh again. So it's 12:01 for all those teams. Everybody's at the beginning, and away they go. So it's an interesting idea that it'll never happen, I don't think. But you do, and you kind of see it indirectly, right? How coaches were, everyone says, how come the coaches are always recycled? Well, again, it's good coaches getting another opportunity to start the clock on their tenure. And then, sometimes, you get to 11:59 and it's about to strike midnight, and you're pretty much at the situation in the situation that Calgary's in right now, where it's out of sync. It isn't clicking. It's just a little bit off. You have to adjust, and maybe you don't have to adjust too much. I mean, that to me is going to be, if you think about one overriding organizational question going into the off season, it has to relate to the players who are in the final years of their contracts. So if you run down the roster, you've got Elias Lindholm, 1 year left on a very good contract. You've got Tyler Toffoli, 1 year left on a very good contract. You've got Chris Tanev in that situation. You've got Noah Hannafin in that situation. I mean, you've got Michael Backlund in that situation. So if you think about like core pieces and pieces that, players that set the direction on the ice and in the dressing room a little bit too, every one of those players is going to have to make a decision about where they want to play next. And within the organization, they have to decide, what do we do with them? Do we try to extend them all? If we try to extend them all, do we have enough money to extend them all? If we have enough money to extend them all, do they want to stay? And if they don't want to stay, then do you do the proactive thing where you start to, explore trade options in the summer? Do you wait to see if you can get this thing back on track? Because if you can't, will their value be the same or even greater at the trade deadline than it might be in the summer? So these are complex questions, and they're not absolutely, there are no absolutely clear answers as to how to handle that. I mean, there's a part of me, the fantasy general manager, or the one that, that takes control of all these 32 teams in my column, that thinks that I want to bring the group mostly back just to see, because I want to give them another opportunity to prove that maybe this is just the usual first year blues that you see from players. Like, not everybody does what Matthew Tkachuk has done, which is go into Florida and then just completely fit in. More often than not, you have players, especially players who are rewarded with new contracts, come in and really struggle to meet the expectations of that. I remember Daniel Briere addressed this once as a player 30 years ago when he, or 20 years, I can't remember, but he made the point that he was not the same when he went to Philadelphia in the first year of a free agent contract, because he felt that on every shift he had to earn that new contract. And it was only when he relaxed and just sort of went back to playing his game and being himself that good things started to happen. So that to me would be the risk of altering too much of the group, because I think you need to see if Kadri is going to be better in his second year than his first, if Huberdeau is going to is better in his second year than his first. I mean, I like Mackenzie Weegar's game, so I have very little.
I think he's been fine.
Yeah. I have little worry about him, but I think he can be better too. So, and then the part two of the equation is, so if that's the decision, and you have all these players on expiring contracts, and you get to March, then you've at least postponed the decision for 6 months, and you've started to get some answers. There's nothing to prevent you from at least exploring the option of signing these guys to extensions in the summer, finding out if any are genuinely interested in returning, finding out what that price point is, because that's challenging too in a year where Huberdeau's money jumps and Weegar's money jumps. You've pretty much spent Milan Lucic's contract on Huberdeau's extension. So it's a puzzle. Building a team in the salary cap era is a puzzle, and you have to treat every one of these pieces as a separate piece of a 25 to 27 piece puzzle that has a lot of blue sky in it. So it's hard to fit those blue sky pieces in any puzzle that you're doing.
I was going to move away, but the one thing we didn't
stick with it. Yeah.
One thing we didn't talk about was the goaltending. Last year, top three in goals against as a unit, and Markstrom had the Vezina Trophy. This year, bottom three. And I'm not sure, and I'm sure there have been, but I don't remember in recent history a swing for the tandem like that. And I know that everybody gets happy feet and we're a year, but is there anything that you've seen this year that leads you to believe that there wouldn't be some sort of backup or bounce back next year from these two?
And that's a great question. And let me start by saying that the one thing that you notice when you watch hockey for as long as both of us have is how much goaltending affects the mindset of the team that's playing, and the position players playing in front of the goaltender, because Jacob Markstrom is a popular player in that dressing room. So is Vladar, to the best of my knowledge, although I don't know that as well. I think that the players want him to be better. I think the players are supportive of him. I think they remember how well he played for them last year and know he can be better. But there are times, especially during that stretch when the first shot was going in, it's seemingly at night after night after night, and now you're climbing out of a hole, and you don't really have the personnel to climb out of the hole. So if you have a McDavid and a Draisaitl who 4 times a period create something out of nothing, then you can recover from 1-0 and 2-1 and so on and so forth. I mean, the biggest, I don't focus on stats too much, but the fact that they have 0 come from behind wins after trailing in the second period is really important in terms of explaining what went wrong, and it has as much to do with goaltending as anything else. So can he get his game back? Yes, absolutely he can. I think he's just proven that that he's a top third NHL goaltender. Not sure why he lost his confidence, because I don't think it's a technical issue as much as it is just a confidence issue. Maybe overcompensating a little bit. I don't think he's as positionally sound or as calm as he might have been a year ago. And then, Rob, you've heard me over and over again talk about my theory of NHL goaltending, which is very similar to my theory of NHL coaching, which is that once you get to this level, there are no bad goaltenders. It's not bad goaltending versus good goaltending. It's hot goaltending versus cold goaltending. And we've seen that over and over again. Even this year, even right now, Connor Hellebuck in Winnipeg was probably the top goaltender in the league for most of the season. And then all of a sudden, he went from being hot to being cold. And what happens now? Winnipeg can't win. So I think there's a lot to what you say, that if the goaltending had been, it wouldn't have even had to have been as good as it was last year, but it needed to be better than it has been this year. And if you have that, then all those games that you've lost, those 1-goal games that you've lost, where a goal, 1 or 2 goals leak in that shouldn't have leaked in, that's 7 to 10 more points in the standings, and now you're the team that's a couple of points ahead of the Winnipegs and the Nashvilles, and you need to have a respectable record in these final games, and you're in the playoffs, and then who knows what can happen. So yes, the goaltending is absolutely critical. The one thing that I was a bit surprised was that during that period of time when things were not going well with Markstrom, why they wouldn't have given Dustin Wolf a chance. And a lot of times, a young goaltender coming up, especially one that has won at every level like Wolf has, usually has a great first 2 weeks. And a lot of times that's because the league doesn't know him, right? So all of a sudden, here's a guy that's come in. We can look at tape, we can do that, but we don't really know him. And it's not as if he would necessarily have had to be here the entire year. But if you needed a jolt, and believe me, there have been times this year when this team looked as if it needed a jolt, wouldn't a week to 10 days of Dustin Wolf have provided that jolt? I think, at some point, seeing Walker Durr and Pelche in the lineup provided that jolt, that young energy, that freshness, that hunger, that young players. That's why that's why you have churn at the bottom of your roster every year to bring in players like that just lift the energy of the group. And I do think that at one point, with the goaltending being as struggling as much as it did, that is something that I might have looked at and then just seen what happened. Because if he had provided that jolt and that level of energy, then again, maybe we're having a different conversation.
I don't disagree with you at all. Let's cleanse the palate a little bit. We'll come back to the NHL in a second. But earlier this week, the World Baseball Classic ended. It ended in this incredible drama with Shohei Ohtani striking out Mike Trout, 2 teammates. It was big numbers. Everybody, baseball fell in love with best on best. Well, that meant that we had to come back and ask hockey about where's best on best. There's no doubt hockey needs best on best, but I think is there still a debate on where and when it should be, or why haven't we seen this?
Well, I think that negotiations. So the next event that was supposed to be on the calendar that featured best on best was going to be a 2024 World Cup, and negotiations were well on their way to formulating how they were going to do it. Mid-season in February. I don't think there was going to be a team North America or a team international, but it would have been a more traditional World Cup / Canada Cup. And then because of political events in Russia and Ukraine, those negotiations stalled, and they are, the last time I checked, still on the back burner. So it's not as if they have eliminated the World Cup from consideration, but it's not going to be played in 2024. So the earliest it could be played is 2025, and that depends again on how things evolve politically in the world, which the National Hockey League and the IHF have no control over. So then, if assuming that, and plus because it takes so long to organize these events, at a certain point you run out of time to do a World Cup. So then the next event that will come up on the international calendar are the 2026 Olympics in Italy. And again, I double checked, and according to the people I talked to, the NHL is still going. So if you recall, when the NHL agreed to a contract extension with a CBA contract extension with the Players Association, sort of around the time of the bubble playoffs, one of the concessions from the NHL was participation in both the 2022 and the 2026 Olympics. That 22 participation was dependent on there being no COVID interruptions to the season, which of course there were. And so I think it was 6 to 8 weeks before they had to make a decision. The NHL withdrew, and teams hurriedly put together, their B and C teams and entered them in there. And at the time, I remember saying, "Okay, does this have any implications for 2026?" And said, "No, because we are still contractually committed to based on these CBA negotiations to participate in 2026." So it hasn't been talked about a lot, but we are 3 years out from that right now. in my head, because this is the kind of thing that I like to do. I was looking at what a Canadian lineup might look like today, and then also trying to project what a Canadian lineup might look like in 3 years' time. So if you're asking me to make my best guess about when we will next see best on best, it is in the Italian Olympics in 2026. So 3 more years. So Connor McDavid will be 11 years in the National Hockey League, and the only best on best competition he played in was part of that young kids roster in the 2016 World Cup. And even after that ended, as much fun as it was, they all said the same thing. The next time I do this, I want the Canadian flag, and the Americans, Austin Matthews. I want to represent my country, not an NHL kids all-star team. So that's, I think, where it's going to go. Some of this, as I say, is kind of beyond the control of the people that are running the show. I know the NHL really wants the World Cup to return, because the difference from the NHL's perspective of World Cup as opposed to Olympics is they have complete control over the event. They have the broadcast rights, the media rights, the internet rights, it's a moneymaker for the league. They can determine who plays and what the format is and what cities get the game. When they're at the Olympics, they are guests of the International Olympic Committee. They can't use their media. They've been trying for a long time to negotiate some compromises there. It's still good for the brand hockey, but it doesn't do much for the brand of the NHL. But what it does do is it allows the players who want to play for their country, who grew up as kids thinking, I want to represent my country in the Olympics, the opportunity to do it. And then, of course, if you turn it over to hockey fans, if you care about the sport of hockey, you want to see those events, right? I was in Sochi. I covered Olympics from Lake Placid in 1980 to the games in Sochi, and I would say that watching and reporting on Canada winning the gold medal in Salt Lake City, and then 8 years later winning the gold medal in Vancouver professionally, those were two of the highlights of my career, to be able to write those stories for the national newspaper, to witness those games. I mean, it was phenomenal, and from the readership and the response from fans, and even people who are only mildly interested in hockey, how much that mattered. And not every tournament is a work of art. The one in Sochi was clinical and methodical, the Canadian win, but boy, some of the Jerome McGinley, Sidney Crosby, golden goal, Ryan Miller. I mean, those are moments that are etched in time, right? So we need that again, and I think we will get it again, but I don't think it's around the corner.
What about the Russia question? I have no problem saying I could care less if Russia played. They weren't in the last World Juniors. So, to me, I think it's one of the very few mechanisms in the world that can get to that guy. I think by not having Russia there, that would embarrass Putin. Yet there's no shortage of NHL people and broadcasters that say, oh, no, you can't do it without Russia. Eric, can you have best on best without Russia?
Well, I think that we saw this week that the International Ice Hockey Federation is going forward with the World Championships this year without Russia and Belarus. And in 3 years from now at the Olympics, it won't be the NHL's decision. It will be the IOC's and the IIHF's decision. And if things haven't changed, then yes, you can go forward without Russia. And I'm almost certain that they will go forward without Russia. It's a different question when it comes to the World Cup, because again, that's an NHL production. And if you watch the NHL, I mean, Alex Ovechkin achieved a milestone this week. He scored 40 goals again for the 13th time, and that's more than even Wayne Gretzky did. The players were wearing Ovechkin jerseys. There were the top players in the game did video congratulations to Alex Ovechkin. As far as they are concerned, as far as the NHL is concerned, the Russian players are part of the NHL family, and I do not believe the NHL will go forward with their version of best on best and exclude Russia.
Wow. Okay. One other, I do want to go back to Ovechkin and the 40 goals, but before I get there, you and I are of an age and a vintage that we lived through the old Don Cherry, Bruce Dobigan fighting. Does it belong in hockey? And it almost seems like that whole thing has died out over time. Yet now it's back in the news. Quebec Major Junior Hockey League is going to ban fighting next year. It's part of their COVID support that they got from the government. They had to agree to it. So it was more of a government mandate. How significant is this in the game today, especially where we've seen just the overall fighting numbers have really fallen off a cliff in the last decade?
How significant? Well, it is significant. I probably don't want to overstate it to say it's a watershed moment, because I don't think it's necessarily that. I think the way you framed the question suggests to me that you know the answer, that the NHL has made a conscious decision to try and have fighting naturally evolve out of the game, rather than take that dramatic step of just saying, if you fight, there's an automatic game misconduct and you're thrown out of the game. They haven't been willing to take that final step. So what they've done is they've introduced measures and rule changes to organically eliminate fighting, and we don't see a lot of staged fighting. I thought it was instructive that at the general managers meetings, one of the topics they discussed, they didn't move forward on it, was, why do players after clean legal hits, have to fight? Somebody, defenseman X steps up on player Y, makes a completely legal check. It's a body contact sport. There should be nothing wrong with it. But the ethic now is that we need to respond to that. And so someone does, and all of a sudden a poor hapless player who has made a legal play now, is challenged to a fight and has to respond. So that's patently wrong, has been wrong for a long time. The general managers know it's wrong. They need to do something about it. They weren't able to come to any kind of consensus about how to address that. I think, again, that would be the sort of situation. I mean, in a situation like that, you can, the instigator penalty gives you a 2-5 and a 10. To me, it's a very easy tweak. You instigate, it's a 2-5 and a game, right? I mean, it's simple as that. So I think that I think that we are inching towards a moment in time when that does happen. That the ban that we've seen in Quebec, the Manitoba Junior Hockey League, is planning to bite. I think that is going to happen, and then I think that's a great litmus test for the National Hockey League. To see if, because the one thing that everyone says is if you ban fighting, then it will allow more of the stick work and no one can respond. I'd like to test that premise to see if that actually happens, because the game, it might have happened if you tried to ban fighting 20 years ago, but I'm not sure that it would happen if you banned fighting today. So let's see how things go in the queue. Let's see where things stand. And I guess I'll say one final thing, because I don't think that anything will change at the National Hockey League level as long as Gary Bettman is the commissioner. So I do think that this is one of those issues that will be status quo in the NHL. They won't take this final step the way some of the junior leagues are doing. But I do believe that at some point between now and 2030, because Bettman promised me he wouldn't be running the team or the league by 2030, that when new leadership comes in, then you will be able to, to make these changes. And that's, if we were having this discussion in 2033, I don't think we'd be having it. I think that, if two players fight in a game, which would happen probably occasionally, they would just simply go to the dressing room and they would get game misconduct and they'd be out of the game. So that's where it's going, but it's not going there anytime soon at the NHL level. Well,
two observations. One observation is interesting to hear the argument about, well, if you take it out, will this happen? It reminds me so much of when visors became, remember, we're going to mandate visors. Whoa, you can't do that. If you mandate visors, then sticks are going to come up. And there's always that reactionary.
Sure.
But I think the other part in this, Eric, is as a guy who was in his youth pro fighting, we had to have it. It's the history. It's the fabric. And, I remember our friend Bruce Dobigan would be the guy that would stand out there and be the lone voice in some cases in the wilderness and say, but that was always a passionate debate. I don't feel any passion this time. It's more like, well, it's going to happen. We'll see what happens. I just don't get the passion that used to elicit in the sport.
Yeah, well, I think your observation is 100% correct. And I think it has to do with the fact that it is slowly leaving the sport. And, to me, the most important crackdown, if that's the right word, that happened was when the NHL said, okay, staged fights are stupid. Like, it's one thing in a body contact sport to have a spontaneous reaction to players going at it. It didn't make it right, but at least, but it was human nature that sometimes happens, and that will continue to happen. Even with a fighting ban. I mean, fighting is banned in the NFL. But a handful of times every year, players fight, and they're ejected from the game, and then the game moves forward. So, but it was getting the staged fights out of the game. Thank goodness. That was a sideshow, and it was unnecessary, and it proved nothing. And the fact that the league was as concerned about that as it was, I think, and took steps to eliminate it, I thought was an important moment, because as I said, I don't think they're ever going to get to that final point where a fight gets you tossed out of the game. But the fact that they were essentially able to eliminate staged fights or dramatically reduce them was an important step forward. And going back to another point that you made there about fighting always being part of the fabric of the game. In 1991, I think it was, I was doing a lot of work for the Hockey News in those days when Steve Dryden was the editor-in-chief, and we had a summit meeting of some of the leaders of the game. I think it was in Quebec City at the draft there, and to debate these issues. And Steve Dryden, similar to Bruce Dobigan, has always believed that fighting needs to be weaned out of the game. And one of the people we invited was Harry Sinden, and Harry made a really passionate point. Now, Harry is as old school as it gets, right? I mean, he coached Bobby Orr and the Big Bad Bruins and so on and so forth. And he said, it's not part of the game. He said the soldiers that invented the game of hockey on the St. Lawrence River in a century and a half ago didn't start out by saying we need to fight if we get out. It was a sport. He said fighting came into the game. And it needs to evolve out of the game. And this is Harry Sinden, who people always say that the reason that the game hasn't changed is because those old school hardliners refuse to budge. But that was like 1991. So we're 30 years past that point. So there has been a momentum going forward for a long time to get fighting out of the game. And yourself too. I guess I would have to say I wasn't as passionate about fighting as, say, my colleague George Johnson, who really, really liked to see a good scrap. But I had issues with it.
Sure.
I just remember seeing Jamie McCowan's face after we walked on the bus after that fight with Ron DeLorme, and he was just it was ugly. It offended me, my sensibilities as a person, notwithstanding what you do for a living. And so I think that that we've gradually figured that out, and then you have your children playing minor hockey, and now and they're watching fighting at the NHL, and you think to yourself, okay, that just sets a bad example for kids, and I don't want my son having to fight in a game. And you dig into your belief a little bit more, where you might have been on the fence on it. And I would probably say that I was on the fence on the fighting issue for the first 10 years I did this. I got off the fence, and a lot of it had to do with coaching kids in hockey and not wanting to see them influenced by fighting at the NHL level and thinking it was okay.
Yeah, I think I'm at the fence now, but Peter Marr would step aside and let me call fights on the radio because I was so far over the top. I thought it was entertainment, but the first time that I sat in with Chris Nowinski from the the concussion program that he's running out of Boston College. He did a presentation here, and it just changed my life.
Mhm.
And you begin to understand the impact of CTE and what concussions and blows to the head can have. It wasn't entertainment anymore for me.
No,
I still struggle a little bit with it because of the history to it and what it's meant. But I like to think I'm evolving. I was going to call myself a hypocrite, but I prefer the term evolving. I think I'm evolving.
And I think you can do that. I've told this story before, but there was a period of time when we're talking specifically about hits to the head, and again, for the first 10 years or so that I covered hockey, that was a clean hit. And I never thought twice about it. Well, it was a clean hit. It's not a penalty, And then I started to see, the hits that Scott Stevens, put on people in the game, and watching Eric Lindros wobble to the bench. And I particularly remember one time Ron Francis, when he was playing for Carolina, wobble to the bench, and thinking, okay, even though it's part of the game and even though it's legal, it's not right. And then a colleague of mine, Cam Cole, really got on the soapbox and said, this has to change. And I remember reading a column of his and thinking, he's right. And again, I'm trying to see both sides and then realize that there is no defending predatory hits to the head, and from that moment on, that's the position I adopted, and I do think that's an evolution. I mean, you can always be stuck in your ways and never evolve and never change. That's not really healthy, and that's just a person thing, not as much as anything else. But it was, I specifically remember reading a very compelling argument from Cam Cole in the National Post about predatory hits to the head, thinking he's right, and it changed the direction of my thinking, and I think sometimes people in our industry can do some good simply by talking about it, by writing about it, by just saying what's true. That's not right, and that has to change.
I'm just going to point out another example of the impact of good journalism, right? That's good journalism, and that's why I still get the pride, whatever we get all these people going, oh, it's you guys in the media doing it. No, good journalism makes you think. Good journalism makes you consider your point, and I just wanted to point that out. So let's end on a light note, shall we?
Okay.
Because we've been talking about some heavy stuff, but about 15 minutes ago you let it slip that you were thinking about rosters for best on best. And we kind of talked about it. Apparently, according to Gavin, we got quite a few comments. People going, "What about in goal?" So, Eric, if you're planning, what are you seeing? What's your crystal ball tell you about goaltending for Canada in the next 3 or 4 years if we get to best on best?
Does that count as a response?
Yes, that counts as a response. It absolutely does.
Did I actually answer the question with a
yes, you did. I think we're all
sound?
there. Yeah, I think we're all there.
And I think the step back and rational answer is it depends, because it would be one thing if you were starting a tournament in 2 weeks time and you had to pick somebody. Because then I think you would simply try to take the hottest goaltender in the National Hockey League with a Canadian birth certificate, or you can look at, if my conjecture is correct, and the next best on best tournament isn't until Italy in 3 years' time. You don't know. You don't know. I mean, so put it this way: when we were doing the lists for 2022, when it looked as if the NHL was going to the Olympics, that was the single biggest question mark. Right. We were talking about will Carter Hart bounce back? Mackenzie Blackwood was in the conversation. There were a number of these young goaltenders coming through the ranks that were showing promising signs, and maybe more good than bad, and then and then they've tailed off or plateaued or dropped. And so I don't know the answer to that. It would be an interesting discussion to have. I saw that this week, the Hockey Canada announced that Doug Armstrong would be running the World Championship team. Steve Eisenman would be his primary advisor. That was interesting to me because Steve, of course, ran Team Canada during those 2 Olympics, won the golds, and then stepped back. So the fact that he is now again taking a leadership position with Hockey Canada, does that mean then that he is part of the mix in 2026 in terms of putting the roster together? I would say yes. I think as long as Doug Armstrong continues to run St. Louis, and because he was tasked with the last team that didn't go forward, that he will probably be the man in charge. I think that will be one of the critical questions that they'll have to answer. And it's not, I mean, I guess it's not that different than some of those other years. When I think about 2002, Patrick Waugh said no, he was the best goaltender at the time. They started with Curtis Joseph. He didn't fare very well in the first game against Sweden, and they veered off. So, and the other thing about, Canadians in goal is that at that level and with best on best, what you want is a goaltender that makes all the saves that they have to. It's rare that you need a goaltender to come in and steal the game. Like I think about the game in Canada played against Latvia in Sochi. The young Latvian goaltender stopped like 60 shots, and it was a close game until fairly late in the game, and they sneaked one out. That goaltender almost stole a game. Rarely, if you have a team that has McDavid and even an aging Sidney Crosby, those teams are so good and they're all the players are so well schooled in all aspects of the game that you just need a goaltender that doesn't leak in a bad one at a critical time in the game. So wish I could answer that question. And I'm pretty sure that as it gets closer to the time when you actually have to make a decision, that will create the most sleepless nights for whoever happens to be running Team Canada at the time.
I'll say this: that would be a good question to ask an American fan right now. They'd feel really good about themselves. Demko, Ottinger, Hellebuck, maybe Dustin Wolf in 3 years, right?
Russia too. Russia. If Russia's in the if in 3 years' time, hopefully things have calmed down in the world and Russia is there, they'll have their toughest decision is who to leave off, or who starts.
Right.
Finland has great choices. Sweden has great choices. It really is an interesting discussion to see who the next great young Canadian goaltender is, and will they be ready in 3 years' time to be the starter in Italy? Good question, and I don't profess to know the answer to that one right now.
I agree. I think that is the most appropriate answer. Eric, as always, appreciate this. I believe you're going to be back in this neck of the woods in a couple of weeks when we do our next visit.
I will try to get into the studio to sit there, and looking forward to it. And please pass on my heartfelt congratulations to Vicki Hall.
She is here right now.
All right. Well, Vicki, congratulations. Well deserved. You've had a fabulous, fantastic career. I can't believe I knew you when you were just a young whippersnapper coming through the ranks. Now you're a Hall of Famer. Well done.
I love it. Thanks, Eric.
Okay.
There you go. Our pal Eric Duhatschek from The Athletic. The aforementioned young whippersnapper is going to join us here in a moment. We do want to let you know that we are in the Oodle Noodle studio. We bring the heat. Try the butter chicken mac and cheese, the Kung Pao noodles, Bangkok Pad Thai classic, vegetarian gluten options as well. Pick up and delivery at 2 locations, 1244 17th Avenue Southwest, 105 Main Street North in Airdrie. I do want to do this quickly, and it's just about to go out, or will go out here momentarily. Today's reading assignment, kids, and I feel terrible because we were just talking about traditional journalism. It's actually a tweet, if you can believe it. It's about, it's from Nathan Baugh, and it's about F1 Drive to Survive, but it's the first time I've seen that's a whole tweet. You can now, if you pay the $450, you can do 4,000 words. But if you read that whole thing about Drive to Survive, it is so well done on the success. And that is Drive to Survive success is the new cocaine for sports marketers. They all want to find their drive. That golf's doing one. Everybody, we got to do it. The problem, and he points it out in there, the problem is everybody tries to do it, but our way, the way we've always done it. We'll do it we're going to put our spin onto it. You have to look at the impact that show has had on a sport. And it had that impact because somebody said, "The hell with it. The old ways aren't working. It's like George Costanza. It's the opposite of that. I'm not going to have a tuna melt." That's how F1 Drive to Survive works. So that's today's reading assignment. We go from one literary legend to another. Very, very excited that Vicki Hall can join us, the newest member of the Canadian Football Hall of Fame in the media section, but also the first female. And that's significant to me. I'll ask if it's significant to her, but she was also, I believe, the first woman, former president of Football Reporters of Canada, if I have that correct, and the first female on the selection committee for the Canadian Football Hall of Fame. That is correct. Vicki Hall joins us now. Congratulations. You can hear me? Yes.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. And Eric just said he was waxing poetic about you and remembers when you were a young whippersnapper. And I think we're all so proud of you. Like, we're all trying to find the right words. It was coming. We knew it was coming, but it just came out. And how do you find out that, by the way? How do you find out you're going into the hall?
Well, it was a little bit complicated because, and thank you for all of that, but Donna Spencer from the Canadian Press actually nominated me.
Okay.
And Donna, if you know her, she can be quite a formal person. So she called me and formally let me know that I was that I had been nominated. The other thing is I'm on the Canadian Football Hall of Fame selection committee, and suddenly I got kicked off the media selection committee. So that was a little bit of a hint. I was
good. It was a hint. You didn't take it the wrong way.
I just wasn't invited to the meetings all of a sudden, which I thought was a little odd. But I didn't find out actually until Daryl Davis from the Regina Leader Post let me know. So
when do you think about that? Like, you're putting people in that category. Are you thinking about it? Like, is my turn coming? Do you allow that to creep into your head?
No, not really, because I think that we all want to think of ourselves as young, right? That young whippersnapper.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
to me, I still feel like quite young. And
Yeah.
so to me, I didn't even really think about it like that. And then, so when I got the call, I was just really shocked. And I still don't know if I really think it's real. So.
Oh, it's real. I mean, we all know about it. There's no take backs. Like, they can't come and go, oh. She was on a podcast in Calgary and said, it's too young, so we're going to wait 20 years and give it to her later. That's not how this works. Why journalism? How did it find you, or how did you find it?
Oh, I think I was the kid, you'll be shocked by this, but I was the kid who talked too much at school. And I actually found school kind of hard in some ways.
Okay.
I had a hard time paying attention, and I always wanted to be on the move, and I knew a 9 to 5 office job would be difficult for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of bambled my way through the first few years of university, lost. And I applied to get into the journalism school at the University of Regina. I got in off the waiting list, and when the letter came, I dropped down on my knees and cried. And because I finally felt, and when I got into journalism and I started at the Edmonton Journal, I was like, this is the first place that's going to pay me to talk on the phone. They're not going to get upset if my desk is messy or if I'm kind of all over the place. So yeah, it was, and I love telling stories. So to me, that's what it's all about.
Why are you not doing this then? Like, everything you just described was 2 years less education and much messier desks. You could have got into radio.
That was the plan, actually. I was supposed to get into radio. I had somebody tell me I had auditioned for a play very early on, and I didn't make it. And he said to me, "You have a voice like Barbara Frum. You should try.
Sure.
You should try radio." And so that was the plan. But back then at the University of Regina, they told you where to go. And so, they told you where to go in many ways, but we had an instructor who would write "Who the F cares" on our assignments quite often. It was the old days. But anyways, I digress. But they told me I was going to the Edmonton Journal, and that was a prestigious internship, and my life was changed. And I didn't get to sit next to you because of that, because my career was changed.
So was it journalism? Was it news, or was it sports? Where did the sports part of it come in?
Well, I always loved sports, and actually I used to try and hide that a little bit because I wasn't a good athlete. That's not my thing at all. I have something called developmental coordination disorder or dyspraxia, which is like dyslexia, except for it's kind of my hands and stuff don't do what my brain is telling it to do.
Right.
So but I did love hockey.
Okay.
And Eric Duhatschek, I used to cut out his articles, and I used to dream of calling the call-in show after Peter Marr
Mhm.
and his radio, because I wanted to let people know what I thought.
Yeah,
And then we moved to Edmonton when I was 10, and I burst into tears when my mom told me because I hated the Oilers. And we moved up to Edmonton, and we lived in Sherwood Park, and my dad had a little punch buggy, and it was the only radio in the house that could get Calgary radio. And I would sit in the car.
70 then, wouldn't it? Back then?
Why do I want to say it was?
Was it 66?
Yeah, it was 66.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. And I would sit in there, and I would sit in the car late at night in my red parka, and I would listen to the game, and it would go.
Oh yeah.
Because it was so hard to hear it. But so I was diehard. But then when I got to grade 7, I was like, oh, girls don't really like that kind of thing. So I tried to hide it for a long time, and then I got into journalism, and I did news, and then they asked me if I wanted to cover sports, and I was like, yeah, that's the thing.
Wow. How this one is kind of a personal one for me, but how important was your news? As brief as it was, how important was it to cover news?
Wasn't brief. Like it was 10 years.
Yeah, that's not brief.
Yeah,
sorry, mine was brief. Yours was not brief.
Mine wasn't brief. I feel I've got a bit of a big head, so this is slipping. What was I going to say? And I digress.
Well, it just, to me, I've always believed that good sports reporters have a strong foundation in news, right?
Yes.
And in the way that news is covered.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that gave me an advantage because I was always looking at the story, and to me, like, I think sports journalism is important to know what the sport you're covering is, but I also think it's important to know how to write a story and to talk to people and to look at things from the bigger point of view. Like a Hall Kelly from the Globe and Mail, it's not just what sports or even the fighting discussion you just had. It's about how it fits into society.
Right.
And so the other thing is I teach journalism now at SAIT, and and a lot of it I talk about, I use sports analogies all the time, but it's like, if you're playing hockey, you need to be able to shoot the puck. You need to be able to stick handle. You need to be able to body check, all these passing, shooting. And when you go to practice, you go to Flames practice, they practice those things every day. So in terms of like writing a lead, conducting an interview properly, asking the right questions, choosing the right quotes, all those things are fundamentals. And for me, I think sometimes in sports, people jump just to I know this and I know that, and they don't get those fundamentals and they don't want to practice them.
To me, it was always the kind of the little things following up and, explaining why it matters. It's not again, to your point, I saw that. Yeah, but why does it matter? And I've always felt that that's been one thing on the TV side and on the radio side that in print, I don't, maybe it's not as valued as much, but that's why print was so important for so long, because the context came there. That's where the true information came from. That's where the true story was written. We drew upon the written word so much for this sport, for all sports, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things I'm teaching in journalism at SAIT is the John Sawatsky method of interviewing, which is asking open questions, lean questions, making sure they're neutral, that you're not putting your own opinion into them. And I think in sports reporting, so that actually ESPN hired this individual to teach them how to interview. And what I find sometimes in sports is the questions are more someone trying to show their knowledge or trying to say, hey, Daryl, do you think that this happened or that happened? Instead of, Daryl, what do you think about this?
Right.
And he might be a bad example because you might not get a great answer depending on what he's thinking anyways. But so to me, I think sometimes that's what the print journalists brought was they would hang in and ask the questions later because that's an unspoken rule usually, is that the broadcast people went first. But then we would ask those other questions.
So you're in Edmonton, you're at the Journal, you've spent 10 years in news, and somebody comes to you and says, do you want to do sports? What's the first story? What's the entry for you into sport?
Well, I lived in Saskatchewan for a time, so I did know a little bit about football, but if I'm very honest, I didn't know a ton. And I'd been working at City Hall. So, and my first training camp I covered was Don Matthews just before he got fired.
Did he get fired? Is that the one where he left, right? Like during training camp, he left and the Eskimos wouldn't talk about it, right?
Oh, yeah. So I have a bit of a story about that. The Journal sent me to Montreal a few years later.
By the way, that was my first Eskimos camp.
Yeah,
too.
I think we were together.
Yeah.
So yeah, we were rookies together.
Yeah, that's right.
So anyways, I get sent to Montreal, like I think the next winter to interview Don Matthews. So Don's agreed to interview. So I go, the Journal's paid for me to fly across the country and stay at the Sheraton in Montreal. So I go to Olympic Stadium. I have my question list planned. I've put a lot of thought into this. And the deal of the interview was that I did not ask him what happened in Edmonton. So I did this whole thing kind of about his life in LA. It was actually very interesting that Don had lost his father early and was always kind of seemingly looking for male role models. And he wanted to be that. Like he had, it was a very fascinating psychology to that man.
Oh, yeah.
So about 45 minutes into the interview, I say, so Don, like, what happened in Edmonton? And he goes, this interview's over. And Louis-Philippe Duray, the PR guy, he's like, Vicki, I told you not to do that. Don is going to kill me. And I literally got marched out of Olympic Stadium. But yeah, so that was my first training camp was that one.
If I remember correctly, you would have had you wouldn't have been the first woman in Edmonton in sports. Were you the first woman to cover the Eskimos, or did Joanne cover it?
No, Joanne Ireland. And like, that was the thing, is in Edmonton, it wasn't really a new thing because Lisa Miller had been there forever and was excellent. And Joanne, she very highly esteemed, very, very respected. So when I came along, it wasn't that different. Sometimes like I had some challenges in that training camp, and I had some challenges covering that team that year, but I think I never know how to separate what was the fact that I was a rookie and I was new. And, the gender thing also obviously came into it, but I think a lot of it was just that I was new. And I also believe that no matter what, if you talk about politics, the press gallery, their culture mimics politicians. And I think in sports, a lot of the things that you see in athletes and in teams, it's the same thing in sports reporting. Like if you're a rookie, you need to earn your respect and you need to respect the people around you and things like that.
Yes. I would go one step further, that I would also say there's geographical components to that I found it was different covering sports in Edmonton than it was in Calgary. And I would say it's different in Toronto and it's different in BC. I think there's not a cultural, but a locale component to that.
There 100% is. And that was the thing, is that while I was not the first woman at all in Edmonton, we were traveling around to these other places and to other places. Yeah, it was still new. And, I would go to Montreal and there was nowhere for me to use the bathroom during a game. So there was definitely, there were definitely different things, and every team in the CFL kind of has a different flavor because of where they play.
Right. You were a fan, or you became a fan of the CFL? How would you describe that?
Well, I'm assuming a lot of people are listening from Saskatchewan. I think if you live in Saskatchewan for a long period of time, you have some of that in you just by virtue of being in the province. So did I know about the CFL? For sure. And did I follow it, but very casually and from a distance? I've
always felt there was, and maybe it's not so much true now, although we had Danny Austin on a couple of weeks ago, and the difference between the CFL and the NHL was, I've always believed that the people covering the CFL really are rooting for the league, want the league to be successful, would want to cover a league that gets out of its own way. But that's difficult sometimes for the league. Is that a fair assessment of what you've seen?
For sure. I mean, to me, that they have problems. Yeah. I mean, it's all, but the thing is, they're always going to have problems. Like they've always, probably since I was born, they've been on the verge of this team's going to fold, or this disaster, or Edmonton is cheating the salary cap and doing, and wins every year. They've always had issues. But I think one of the charms of it, and lacrosse, I think, is similar, is that the players make the same money as a lot of us make, or similar. They are in a same sphere as us. And I think that in some ways makes them more relatable. They work jobs. A lot of the players that you and I covered are mortgage brokers, real estate agents, firefighters, police. So I think that's one of the things. It's a very relatable, fun league with a lot of very interesting people.
When did you come to Calgary?
2008, I came after the Beijing Olympics.
Okay. So you missed, no, you wouldn't have. You covered him from afar, but you missed Michael Federick, Fred Fateri, and that whole gong show.
I was like, I covered it because I was covering the league as my beat, but at the same time, I wasn't. That was Michael Petrie.
Yeah.
He did an outstanding job there on that.
Oh,
so
deserved a medal.
He did deserve a medal for that. But yeah, it was that was definitely a circus, and it's been interesting in recent years to speak with Wally just about some of those times. If you could ever get Wally on the show, I would really recommend it, because if you can give him some truth serum, man, he's got lots of stories.
I love him. I think he's such a dignified representative of the crap that went on around never stuck to Wally, because Wally carried himself and was, just a true gentleman and a really good representative of the sport, and did not deserve to go through any of that.
No, Wally, I used to love to go to Wally's coaches' news conferences, partially because people used to joke with me. Peter Lombardius and I actually have this in common, in the fact that we always make sports life comparisons and things.
Yeah.
So Wally, if you'd go to his coaches' news conferences, I wanted to hear what he had to say about football, but I also wanted to hear what he wanted to say about life.
Yeah. I use it to this day. Football is not a democracy.
No, it's not.
It's not. And it works in so many situations, right? Yeah. Sometimes somebody's got to make a decision.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even Wally, when he talks about The Rock, by the way, Wally does talk a lot about The Rock these days.
He does.
When I see Wally, it's so funny because Wally cut him, right?
100%.
And it's this thing, but you know what? They're in contact. They still chat and it's
two ways.
He texts him. They text each other.
It's two ways,
yeah.
Right? Like Dwayne Johnson has talked openly about Uncle Wally, right? And how long was that? A couple of months? He wasn't here a couple of seasons.
No, not even. He didn't make it out of training
right,
camp, right? He was staying at Motel Village, and he was just some guy.
But that's the impact, right? That is the impact.
Yeah, I think we all have people like that. I know my son does at hockey, where you don't have to spend a ton of time, but it's about I was messaging with John Garrett today. And,
did you?
I messaged John Garrett and I said, because John always talks to people like you matter.
100%.
It does not matter who you are, and what your station is in life. If he's having a conversation with you, he's 100% in with you, and he wants to hear what you think. And I messaged him and I said, you might have been good at stopping a puck, even though some people might argue with that.
Hey, he was an all-star at an NHL all-star game. He was the MVP at an NHL all-star game.
So I said, but to me, the big thing about you is you're real and your humility. Because to me, humility is not that you're better or worse than anyone, that we're all humans together in this experience. And John Garrett, to me, is incredible there.
For those who don't know, John, obviously the color analyst on Vancouver television, I should say, for the Canucks, and is retiring after this year from color analyst. Sounds like he's going to stick around, but John refers to me as number 35. I was the 35th play-by-play guy that he worked with. So he calls me number 35. But my first game with him, he couldn't have been nicer. That's the joy of this job. You beat people like yourself, or Eric Duhatschek, or John Garrett in this case. And they mean something, right? It means something to have these people in your lives.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I still have John Garrett's hockey cards, right?
For sure.
But he wanted to know what was going on with me. Over the years, he sent me messages on Facebook saying, your son needs a haircut. Take him to get a haircut. Things like that.
That sounds like John. Yeah.
So,
that sounds like John.
He's a great guy. Yeah.
Okay. So one guy that I do want to ask you, and I had a experience with him, but going back to your days covering the Eskimos, he wouldn't have had as prominent a role, but tell me about Coach Campbell. Tell me about Hugh Campbell. Do you have a Hugh Campbell story, or?
Oh, well, Hugh was one of those people, right? I have a story about Hugh. So very early on, I had to go to I think it was their annual general meeting.
Yeah.
And it was always interesting in Edmonton covering there because that team had a ton of money.
Oh, yeah.
But if you looked at their books each year, they were
just scraping by,
just getting by,
just
right?
getting by.
Just getting by. It was an interesting thing. But anyways, I was sitting, no, it wasn't the meeting. It was a breakfast with all the season ticket holders. And these are the people who are very dedicated. And it's this breakfast. And Hugh gets up there and he's like all shucksy and and he announced that all the season ticket holders were losing their parking because the track and field championships were done. So they were taking all their parking near Commonwealth Stadium away. And, you know, that area can be challenging at night.
Yes,
like
it can.
I used to always get someone to walk me to my car.
Yeah.
So he announced that all of them were losing their parking for the entire year. And at the end of that speech, they got up and gave him a standing ovation. And that was Hugh Campbell.
You and I have a mutual friend that I probably don't want to name, but you'll know when I tell you this who it was, said that in the 80s, everybody thought it was Potlington and the Oilers and Glenn Sather. The most powerful man in Edmonton was Hugh Campbell. That if you wanted something done, you went to Hugh.
Yeah, absolutely. He just made things happen. And he has just such a relaxed demeanor and not confrontational. And yeah, and I mean, they used to call it the Campbell Football League, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So, I mean, if he was running the city of Edmonton, he was also running the CFL at the time.
So you come to Calgary in 2008. It's a bit of a rebirth for the organization. New ownership. Ted Hellard, Henry Burris is here. Tom Higgins, a familiar face, is here. What was that transition like? You know, coming up and being in the new city. And then I believe you were moving, or did you move right into hockey?
I moved right into hockey.
Yeah, you did, didn't you?
I came down because it was like this chance of this dream job. So I got to cover hockey with Scott Cruikshank and Jean Lafay, who's now with the Stamps. And yeah, that was, it was a whole new world, right? My first story was on Todd Bertuzzi. I had to sit down with Todd, which was actually kind of similar to the Don Matthews interview. He was fine, but he was so tense.
Yeah.
Like he was just like, he was sitting there, he had a skate and he kept like, he had the lace of his skate and he kept going like this. Like he just kept waiting for me to ask the
Dominic Moore story.
Yes. Right? Yeah. Like he was so tense. And Peter Hanlon was like circling.
Yep.
He was just circling around. So yeah, I came in, it was into the hockey world. And, but you know what? It's kind of interesting in life, like you back here behind the mic.
Yep.
Sometimes I think when you have things in life that you're pulled to, or big picture, maybe even destined for it, they just keep pulling you back. Right. And so I ended up helping out on football, and I never really strayed that far. It just kept pulling me back.
But what was it like? I mean, Calgary versus Edmonton. I mean, those teams were about to get good in Calgary, but you come from Edmonton, the expectation was success, a bigger building, a football building. It just, to your point, it never seemed like the hair was on fire. And 2008 was kind of the first time in a while, Wally would probably argue because they won in 2001, but for a good portion there, that's this franchise in this city was a laughingstock, to be perfectly honest. What were your observations of the two organizations?
Well, I think at the time Calgary had just gone through, like, it was awful, right? But I think in the CFL, actually probably any kind of organization, once John Hufnagel came in, and I'm forgetting the exact year, but once we had that piece in, then the whole thing could start to be rebuilt, right? And I think that was the thing. I mean, Henry Burris they had some great players. When I came down, Nick Lewis and Jermaine Copeland, Nick said that I hated him.
Yeah.
I have no idea why he said that, but Nick thought I hated him. And every time we'd go into the locker room, he'd be like, "You hate me. Why are you down here covering me?" Because Nick and Jermaine would go up to Edmonton, and I think they had some interesting end zone antics.
They did.
And
they
some things like that.
I loved it. And it used to drive certain people up in Edmonton nuts. And I love that even more.
Yeah.
Right. Because the league sports are better with bad guys, better with villains, better with people wearing black hats. And I thought that era of the Tom Higgins era and into the Hufnagel kind of did away with it. But that Tom Higgins era, the Stampeders had no problem going into your yard and kicking your dog.
Oh, without a doubt. And Jermaine and Nick, like that team had a personality, right? Like, and even Henry in his own way.
Oh, Henry was the most put upon person in the history of the world. Like everybody was out to get Henry. And I love the man. Don't get me wrong, but Henry was always a victim, right? Like nobody likes me. Nobody likes us. and that's how he approached it, which worked for him.
That was the way that was one thing I learned in sports, is that everyone is motivated differently.
Yes.
Like if Mike Pringle was not angry, the running back for
Yep.
Montreal and Edmonton, if he was not angry going into a football game, he was going to have a horrible game.
Right.
He needed to be angry. And Nick and Jermaine kind of were that. But the evolution of Nick over the years was interesting
Something else,
because he turned into, so when I covered him in the beginning, he was this skinny little receiver who ended, what was it, Shannon Garrett's? Like he there was a bad hit in Edmonton and he ended the guy's career, right?
Yep.
And he was just seen as this villain, but as time went on, and now look at him, right? Like he's so it was interesting evolution. And I think he said to me at the end that he knows I don't hate him. So
I was there when he wore I think it was an Eric Francis column on his back. He taped it to his back and he came out in practice.
I remember that.
Right.
Yeah, he was. It was always something interesting. With
Were you there
guys.
when Ricky Williams came? The big scrum with Ricky Williams in Calgary.
Yeah, I was. Yeah.
There was, I don't know why it was that period of time, but there was some crazy stuff that, the league saw and players coming through, and it just seems so foreign now, right?
Yeah, and I mean, just crazy. Like John Avery in Edmonton was one of the best quotes I've ever, just such interesting people. And it was always just so much fun.
Right. All right. But you did move here for hockey. You do cover the NHL. This is the first go round, or did you back up in Edmonton too?
No, it was my first go round.
Okay.
But so it was covering the team that I used to, cut out all the articles. Steve Simmons as well. I used to cut him out too.
Yeah.
So it was a chance to do my dream job.
And you step in, Bertuzzi's here. I believe that's Keenan's.
Yeah,
right?
It was Keenan. Yeah, it was.
And that you can you draw many parallels between Mike Keenan and and other guys in the CFL? I mean, Don Matthews comes to mind. Like,
I can draw parallels between Mike Keenan's reputation and Don Matthews, but at the same time, Iron Mike, when I was covering him, wasn't really Iron anymore. Like he was, fair
enough.
Like to me, I didn't see a ton of that edge. I saw a guy who was a bit, further on in his career, and he wasn't there. And I think there was the one time at practice where he, I don't know if it was TSN, but the cameras caught him slamming his stick against the boards, and that was like,
Iron Mike's back.
Yeah, Iron Mike's back. But even then, because I think I was sitting in the stands with you that day, it felt a little bit scripted and forced. And so, I don't think Iron was that Iron when I covered him.
I just found with Mike Keenan that towards the end, he did a lot of storytelling and which I thought was more intended to kind of build or maintain the reputation, not build the reputation, but he would tell us stories about him and Pat Croce in Philadelphia and how they invented certain things. And remember the playing the winger on the offside. I stole that from lacrosse. And we went and measured the corners in Maple Leaf Gardens and found out they were square and stuff like that. There was a lot of storytelling with Mike, right?
Yeah, I got to cover the 1972 Summit Series 50th anniversary last year for CBC, and it was interesting. I didn't talk to Mike, but I read some of his quotes about that, and it was like telling all the stories about the olden days, and that is actually what I remember about covering him.
Yeah.
Really, people would always be like, "What's he like?" And I'm like, well, he's polite enough.
He is what he is. Thoughts on the transition? I mean, where the players weren't the same. They aren't. Right. The access is okay, but the players, I just never, I felt like you could always go to a CFL practice, talk to a player and come up with gold. Always. But that you were hoping for that when you went to cover the Flames or the NHL.
Yeah, I actually found it a lot harder. Like, actually, I was doing a class at SAIT yesterday, and we were talking to Bev Wake, who used to work in Vancouver, who was the editor out for the Vancouver Sun, and then for Post Media and Sports. And she said that she thought for story ideas, the hardest thing would be if you were covering a beat. And I would say not CFL. There's always stories and interesting people, but the NHL, the rosters are smaller. People are so careful what they say. I hope it's changing a little bit, but the idea was to be as ordinary as possible and not say much. I admit that I used to think Mark Giordano was a bad quote.
Mhm.
I thought it was a bad quote. Like he never really said anything. And then I can't remember which year it was. He'd been around for a couple years, and we were in Detroit.
Mhm.
And Kiprusoff, I think it stopped, I don't know, 55 shots or something. They still lost, right? Like
Yeah, as they do in Detroit at that
yeah,
era,
he had Kiprusoff had just had like this incredible game. And I remember Mark, we were asking for players and nobody was around, and Peter comes out, or Sean Kelso comes out with Mark, and he's like, we just hung our goalie out to dry, and he's like, we can't play like that and everything. And to me it was like, who is this person?
Yeah.
And it was like Mark had hit, like it was very deliberate. It was Mark had hit the point that he'd been around long enough and was playing well enough that now he felt that he could speak. And in the end, I think Mark's an outstanding quote. And he's a very interesting man.
But I wonder if that isn't the code, right? I never, outside of offensive linemen not wanting to talk, you really, everybody would talk. But I almost find like with the NHL player that I've got to be in it. Michael Backlund was always good, but to a point. And now, is there a better interview on this team than Michael Backlund right now?
No, there isn't. No, I think Michael was always good, but careful.
Right.
And Michael, what he would do is he would talk and he would be saying something interesting and then he would stop.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like he was stopping himself out of respect, right? He was playing on the same team as Jerome McGinley, Alex Tongue. Like he would stop himself for sure. Corey Sarich was an amazing quote.
He was.
Yeah, like Corey was amazing.
We got a fully formed Corey Sarich, right?
Yeah, he was. Yeah, Corey was fantastic.
I mean, we're not going to talk about Conroy. That goes without saying, right? That we don't have to.
But you know what? Craig is a bit like John Garrett, because the first day I walked into the Saddle Dome and I'm scared and I feel like I shouldn't even be there. He walks up and says, "Hi, my name's Craig Conroy.
Yep.
How are you today?" And, never any airs or never anything. And, it's people like that who.
He could have been a CFL player.
Yeah, he could have done your job.
He has done my job and better. I'm just trying to think. Were you there when Curtis Joseph came? Do you remember that scrum?
I was not, I don't think.
42 people in that scrum. So that was Keenan's last year, right?
Was it? Yeah. Why don't I remember that? I'm not sure.
It was huge. It was just huge. And he just played in the Spangler Cup, was off for a couple weeks, and then the Flames signed him. There was lots of speculation of where he was going to go. Flames signed him. And I remember there's 42 people in that scrum. That's crazy. Cameramen and reporters and everything like that. And the other one was, you mentioned Backlund. You remember when Lanko got hurt?
Oh, and my goodness.
Backlund, as the rookie, was going to center Ginla Tongue.
Yep.
And that was the biggest story in the history of stories, right? And that's one time his eyes were wide.
Yeah. Oh, I remember being on the plane, Lanko was injured and we were very, very, very worried about him.
That was in Minnesota.
Yes. Yeah. And normally the print people would not, we didn't fly with the team and we would kind of be behind on what things were going, but I flew on the same flight back with David. And I remember he had the brace on and he was sitting very straight. And I am like, "Are you okay? How are you?" "I'm fine."
Yeah. That was probably the longest Damon Lanko interview ever, there. Right?
Yeah, I'm fine.
What do you also, as we go through this journey, should mention Olympics, right?
Yeah.
How many Olympics did you cover?
I think it was 6.
6. So 3 and 3, or?
I think 4 and 2.
4 and 2.
Yeah,
okay.
4 winters, 2 summers.
What was that? That's a different experience. That's almost like different work, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's a peak career experience. I think that and it's addictive. Like it's like, when I said I was the one who walked in, I didn't want the 9-to-5 job and I wanted to be going. Well, you go to an Olympics, it's 21 days of just going nonstop and going from, huge event to huge event. And, if you're covering track in Rio, like there's Andre DeGrasse, but there's Usain Bolt, and it's almost too
much.
It's the problem is it's in this very short period of time. Right. And you have this little pass around your neck with an infinity sign, which means you can go to every event. You can go anywhere at the Olympics and just walk in. And I think if you could spread that out across your whole life, it would be.
Yeah, no kidding.
It would be amazing, as opposed to bang, 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 bang. But yeah. And then when you went from the Winter Olympics to the Summer Olympics, that's the other thing, because the Winter Olympics we think are big, but most of the world is not a winter
country. No,
like when you go into the Summer Olympics and then you're sitting in that press center, and that's like when you're talking about best on best with Eric, like all of a sudden you're sitting with all the best journalists in the world. You've got, all the ones from Fleet Street and, Christine Brennan sitting over there. And so, but you know what, that was almost, to me, I love those things. And I talked to them about my journalism students is find heroes in whatever it is that you do, and find people that you look up to and try to be like them.
Yeah. Okay. Open door. Who were they for you?
Oh, I tried to take different things from different people, right? I mean, I dreamed of writing like an Ian McIntyre, but I didn't quite have that, or a Bruce Arthur. I thought Cam Cole did a great way. Like, I thought like you could always start his column and get to the end, and it felt like it took 30 seconds when really it was 900 words. So I just really liked his turn of phrase and the way that he did things. I thought Al Mackey was very fair always, and like he in terms of context and what does this mean and balance and like clear. When you talk to Al Mackey, he's just very clear headed.
Yes,
and he writes very, very clear.
I wish more people not understood it. I think everybody knows what you're talking about, but it frustrates me now that whenever I seem to follow teams or whatever, the journalists seem to almost be possessive. And I kind of miss that, it's not my team. I'm just covering the story here. Right.
Oh, very much so. Yeah.
That's
how
Al
I was taught.
Yeah. And Al was, Al could write on anything.
Absolutely
you
anything.
Never accuse him of anything.
No, and Al could move in and cover. I think he did. He could cover a court case just as well as he could cover. Like he did. You're right. Absolutely exceptional. So, and then I would watch Christy Blatchford, and I actually became very good friends over the years. At first, she terrified me, but you know what, Christy? One thing Christy taught me was to believe in myself.
Yeah.
Because she would tell me, she'd be like, "You know what the story is. Don't ask what the story is. Like you."
Yep.
And so, I think Christy taught me how to believe in myself.
It's crazy. I think about some of the personalities you were around. Large up in Edmonton, Terry Jones.
Oh,
right?
Big fella. He knew this. Like he knew the story. He would go. Was a big picture. He'd always go like he wanted to write the big picture, right? And and the other thing is, I've never seen anyone set the agenda as much as he did. Like he would walk in and whatever he asked the question about was the story.
That's a really good way to put it. Yeah, and what I respect about him, and I don't think there are anymore, but talk about a guy that could jump into the middle of anything. Was just as comfortable doing the Stanley Cup as he was the World Figure Skating Champions or the CFL or the NFL or whatever. I mean, the last of the true sports reporter without a beat, right?
Yeah, he was amazing. And I competed against him for years, and he made me better. He beat me a lot. Yeah. I covered a lot with him in Beijing at the Olympics. We were technically competitors, but it was very hot, surprise, in Beijing and humid. And Jonesy was struggling a little bit and health-wise. And I remember we got caught in a monsoon on the way to soccer, and we all got
drenched.
Jeff Blair was there too. But Jonesy ended up having pneumonia.
Oh, wow.
And we didn't know that. So, but we were like super. I remember we were watching him after climbing 4 or 5 stairs at soccer, and we didn't know if we were going to get him out. Yeah.
I kind of admit, and it'd be remiss if I didn't. You mentioned once, you mentioned a couple of them. George Johnson, there has to be some recognition for George Johnson and his ability to have his voice in your head when you're reading his articles and his references that were, to some may have gone right over their head, but if you knew him, man, they were bang.
Oh, like George, his writing is an art. Like it's an art, and like his similes and his metaphor. Like I try to do that, but I can't. Like mine are off. So I try, but his simile and metaphor, incredible. The other thing is you'd sit next to George, and I remember at Memorial Cup with him in Regina the one year, and he's sitting there and he's typing and he's like, "This is terrible." this is horrible. This is crap. And it would keep going like that. And then the more he said that, the more the piece you read next day, you were like, this is the best thing I've ever read. The more how terrible he said it was.
No, he was he loved being the character. Like he loved being the character of George Johnson. Like that was a character for him.
Just amazing talent. Like just, when if you have an offensive playmaker who's like, I can't believe you can do that.
Yeah.
That's what I feel like reading George Johnson's columns.
And I think they're both really good writers. I mean, one hasn't been writing for a long time, but both Jean and Scott Cruikshank, you could tell the influence, but they took it their own way. Like
they both took it their own way.
Scott Cruikshank is, to me, it bothers me that, and no disrespect to Julian McKenzie or anybody at The Athletic, but I thought it was a huge miss for them when they dropped him, because he can write in stories. His story on Tyler Parsons and his concussion was as fine as sports writing that I've read in the last decade.
Oh, Scott is amazing. Like he's got his own voice. He has some George influence, I think, but he has his own voice. He was a star at the Medicine Hat News a million years ago. His writing, the other thing about Scott is he writes this beautiful stuff. He could file something 30 seconds after deadline, because I also did some editing. Not one error. Like it was absolutely so. Like once again, just a beautiful turn of phrase. His Mickey Renault piece, if I remember correctly,
when Mickey passed away,
was like absolutely incredible. So yeah, he was. There was definitely an all-star team of sports journalists when I came down to Calgary.
Do you miss it?
Yeah, I miss once. It's one of those things that keeps pulling me back. Like I had a little boy, and he.
You don't have a little boy; you have a little superstar.
I have a little AJ, but he has autism, and I didn't know that he had autism, but I knew that he was going to need everything I had, and so I pulled out and worked in communications because I wanted a regular job. But this has always kind of kept pulling me back. I've done a lot of freelance work for CBC and hockey. And so I've never, the day I left the Calgary Herald, Jose Rodriguez, because the Sun and the Herald were together at that time, we ran into each other in the hallway, and he's like, "Hey, Vicki, he was making some smart remark." And I turned around and looked at him, and he's like, "Oh my God, give me a hug." And I sobbed all over his suede jacket. Like for me, it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. And I was but I felt like it was the right thing for my family. Yeah. But sometimes things just keep pulling you back. And so I feel like I still have a hand in it, but, and now that I teach journalism, I kind of feel like I might get more involved at some point.
My 4.5 out when I was retired, when I retired, I missed the story. Like because I'd hear something, I go, "Oh, that's the story." Right. Or it's coming. Here's the story that's coming. I miss that. And a couple times, on a Sunday morning, you and I will just, did you hear what Daryl said? Yeah. This is what I'm, old habits die hard.
This is the story here. And I see it all the time. Like, and I like, oh, they're missing this, or what about that? What about that? And why hasn't anyone asked this? And like, I can't turn that part of my head off.
No, it's the hardest part. Any of the stories right now that you'd like to get something off your chest about? I mean, the local hockey heroes are dysfunctional, I think is the right term. The league has a kind of a I don't know what you'd cry. The NHL whole pride issue is self-inflicted, I think. You got some great Canadian soccer drama right now. I mean, it's a busy world right now in the world of sport, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, like I'm very interested, like everybody else is, to see how the Flames, what happens in the off season. If I could come in off the bench on locker room cleanup day, garbage bag day, I would like. That's a garbage bag day I would like to attend for sure. And yeah, there's always but you know what? The other thing is one of the things that I took the most joy about was some of the stories that people never saw. So it would be like with our, all the Olympians who train in Calgary, and And also a lot of the work that you're doing with, that people don't realize at an amateur level. So that's the other thing is I think as you get older, maybe some of your priorities change, and maybe
Oh,
what you
for
think
sure.
what you think the story is might change too.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's that whole conversation about, ever since the Quebec League, and I knew it was coming because I knew behind the scenes it was talked about during COVID that they were going to get the bailout money from the government, but the government was going to make them take the one thing on the radar was they were going to take fighting out of the game or make them take fighting out of the game. So here we are. And, we were having that whole conversation. I mean, that was my thing when I came to Calgary.
I remember that. Yeah.
Right. It was my thing. And then I went and saw Chris Nowinski speak on head trauma and head issues and concussions. And, I've taken the reporting course and everything like that. And it just changed my life. It changed my mind. Right. Like,
yeah. I worked on a series on concussions in 2015.
Yeah.
Youth concussions. And it actually won a national newspaper award, which was probably one of the highlights of my career. But that was about, and it was based on a young woman in Ottawa who died after repeated, and there was no concussion protocols.
What was the sport?
That was rugby.
Rugby. Okay.
Yeah. And she just kept playing because she felt that was what she was supposed to do.
Yep.
And the story we worked on was a part of a team, but it was about how there were no regulations at that level, like at all. But one thing that I find now is if I watch a hockey fight, and sometimes I've thought it's the mom in me, but I don't know, is that if I watch it, I feel guilty for watching it. Because I watch and I'm like, that's somebody's son.
Yep.
That's a real person there. And we don't know what the impacts are. So to me, I think that at some point in time, society might tip over to that. That we can't go back.
All right. All right. A couple of rapid fire to finish us off here. And we're going to have you back on. I can't not have you back on, but best player you ever covered in the CFL? For you, sorry, best player for you as a reporter that you ever covered in the CFL?
Oh, Ed Hervey, for sure.
He's something else.
Ed Hervey is so intelligent, and he also knew how to look at the whole picture all along. He came from Compton, and he saw a lot of things. So yeah, Ed Hervey.
What was the best game you ever covered in the CFL?
That was 2009 Grey Cup when Saskatchewan too many men and
here.
And I mean, I don't want to say that's the best game, but it was the most dramatic game. And
sure.
going in that locker room after, and watching how different people process grief was amazing.
Well, and to me, exactly, because I guess the way I phrase that to an athlete, when I ask an athlete who retires, when you close your eyes and you hit the pillow, what's the game that you remember? That to me is the game you remember, right? Because of it was over. Like it was honest to God over. And it was really going to create a narrative around Anthony Calvillo and the Alouettes that they ran away in the regular season for a decade, did nothing.
Yep.
Right. It changed so much.
It was just being in that visitor room and like what that would have meant to Saskatchewan and just the shock people were in.
Yeah.
And like there were players vomiting, they were crying, they were screaming. Some were just quiet, just like in life, something bad happens. How do you react?
Yeah.
We're all different.
Yeah. Either sport or any of them, but what was the best part of the job? What was the part that was the best part of the job?
Well, I bet you everyone says this, but it's the people. It was the people who I worked with and covered. I mean, like it was such a privilege to tell people's stories.
Mm-hmm.
But what I learned is I'm looking at some of the jerseys that you have up here and things like that. It doesn't matter what your name is, how much money you make, how many people cheer for you. You're still human, right? And I learned that people have, they have breakups, they have problems with their family, they have happy days, they have, one day Jerome McGinley came over and helped me clean off my windshield, right? Like they're very human. And so to me, I think getting to be around so many highly successful, intriguing humans was the best part.
So for me, it was the travel part, in the sense of being able to see the sports that I covered in other places with other contexts. And the example I always give is Nashville, because it was so easy to pick on Nashville. It's a southern state. It's Gary's mess. It's never going to work there. Why would they go to Nashville? And then the first time you go to Nashville, you go, oh, okay, no, I get it.
Oh, people love it. Like in Nashville, I was actually talking to my son's teacher yesterday because she's going to Nashville on spring break. And I was like, Nashville is the people are so friendly. They love hockey. They've learned about hockey.
Oh boy,
Don't say that they're uneducated.
No.
They know a lot.
We got a high school program. Hell, most of the teams in Calgary go down to a tournament in Nashville. It's become a tournament hub for youth hockey and things like that. So to me, that was, I agree with you. The people and that is something, but and you've done it. It's getting outside of your own world and seeing the rest of it and putting that context into sport, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you said to me, what's your favorite part of covering the Canadian Football League specifically, it was going to learning so much about my own country.
Okay.
And sitting in Hamilton and watching a game with the Steel Mills and climbing up the mountain at McGill and watching in Toronto and the people who do come to those games. And then in Winnipeg, watching the passion people have for it. And then Saskatchewan, the obsession they have for it, right? Like it was a great education in Canada, really.
Are you worried about the CFL at all?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, but the thing is, it's a constant, I was thinking about the other day, when have I not been worried about the CFL?
Yeah.
I worry about this international direction. I'm not a fan of it. And I worry that the pandemic damaged the CFL more than others because it was just completely off. So I worry about them, but the comfort I take is that we're always worried about them and they always seem like they're going to collapse. So
did you live through the US expansion?
Well, I was a fan at that time.
Okay.
But you know what?
It was just after though, right?
It was really interesting because we were talking about Larry Smith.
Yeah.
And him going into the Football Hall of Fame. And people were saying, well, how could he go in the Hall of Fame? Because he was the commissioner during US expansion.
Mm-hmm.
But Wally was saying, so that would the league have survived without it?
No.
I mean, we can sit back now and say that's ridiculous. Shreveport, are you kidding?
Yeah.
But
the infusion of cash kept the league alive.
So, there you go. And once again, that's the context of a story as opposed to just and maybe that's the thing on Twitter these days. People make opinions and I can too, and just immediately and say, oh, I feel really strongly about this and not read the entire piece and see, well, that's why they did it.
I want to end this with you talking about your favorite athlete and the impact that he's had on you and me. I know you as in many forms, but I also know you as a hockey mom, which I'm really excited about. And me as the guy chasing you off the bench.
Yeah, that's true.
But
every Sunday.
But tell me about AJ and tell me about what it's just the joy that he brings you, because he brings us so much joy.
Well, when my son, he was just before his 5th birthday, he was diagnosed with autism. And that was one of the hard days of my life. And I was in this appointment with this psychologist, and she said, she was great. She was telling me about what his challenges were going to be. And she's been bang on. Yeah. And one of the challenges, she goes, your son's going to struggle in unstructured social situations because he doesn't pick it up naturally. She was so on the school bus at recess, and she goes in the hockey dressing room, not that he'll ever play hockey. And she didn't know my background at all, but I remember kind of, feeling like I was punched, but then moving on right away. We were dealing with a lot. And I live in the South, and we'd be down at Trico, and I would walk past where Timbits were playing, and I would feel bad, and then I'd feel guilty for feeling bad because I love my son as he is.
Yeah.
But then during the pandemic, Kevin, the phone rang one day, and he said, we have a spot for your son to play hockey. And I said, well, I don't know if my son can play hockey. He's got sound sensitivity and this and that. And he's no, we want your son to come play hockey with superheroes, and we play on Sundays. And he was giving me all the details, and he said, your son is a hockey player. And I didn't know this guy, and I burst into tears. So he is a hockey player. He plays every Sunday, and it's just such a safe, caring environment. My son's talents are that he's a great talker, and he's expressive, and he's passionate, and it's all on display. Sometimes those things can make things challenging.
Yep.
So, but it's a safe place for everybody. And to me, it's been the most rewarding thing I've been around in sports.
He's also a ringette player.
He does play ringette.
And what else? Lacrosse.
He plays lacrosse. He's going to play challenger baseball this year. And he loves all of it, but he wants to be an announcer.
Oh yeah. So
or a ref. He wants to be a ref because he wants to tell people what to do.
Yeah.
And he wants to be an announcer because he thinks he might be good at it.
Well, because he doesn't toot his own horn, I'm going to toot it. Kevin Hodgson, who's the ED for Heroes Hockey and Superheroes, found that out and arranged for an opportunity. Tell us a little bit about AJ at the Flames game this year.
Yeah, so AJ got to be the fire starter, and that's the kid who yells "make some noise." Then
now remember, you said there he is right there. You said, oh no, you don't have the monitor, I do, but I can confirm that is your son AJ. But he has sound sensitivity. Right?
Oh yeah, like a year before when I talked about Trico, like we took him over to Trico just to kind of practice to skate, and we had to leave immediately because of the sound of the pucks hitting the boards. We couldn't really go anywhere, and the pandemic made that worse because we didn't get to practice. Like Chinook Mall, nightmare, like anything like that. So
the idea of him going to the Dome.
Oh, we wouldn't go to the Dome. Like we went to, before he was diagnosed, we went to a Hitman game one day, and it was awful. Like, every time, like the horn or anything. So, but, it was like superheroes hockey was kind of our gateway. And, the other thing is we've had a lot of support through the community, through FSCD, Family Support for Children with Disabilities. And so he just gradually, his world got bigger and bigger and bigger. And so then Kevin asked if he could come to the Saddle Dome for this. And I was like, well, I don't know, but kids up front gave him a ticket to go to a Hitman game, and that was a success.
Okay.
So I was like, okay, my confidence started to grow, but I was still really scared about the game.
Yeah.
And we went, and at the end of the third period, they had him go up there, and he didn't want to wear his headphones.
Which he would normally.
Yeah,
right?
he would. He didn't want to wear them. And we went up right before he was supposed to say his thing, his lips started to quiver, and he was looking at this. And so I was in the background. I'm like, you can do it. You can do it. And he did an amazing job. I was so proud of him. And you know what? That was a confidence builder. And when you think a year prior, he could not go into Trico, for anyone knows, which is just a community rink. It was incredible.
It's the power of sport. It is the power of sport. It's the power of being part of a team. It's a part of the just getting together. And by the way, we had a picture of AJ up in the fire. Now he came back too. We should point out that he went back for the overtime too, right? They brought him back.
Well, the story is that somehow we got the tickets from the Flames, but they couldn't find us. But anyway, so that we almost didn't make it there. So we were, but yeah. So he went, and then Grant asked him to come back for the overtime because Grant was blown away. Grant knew what AJ's situation was, and as I said, he's just an engaging kid. Like we went to McDonald's last night, and we're going through drive-through, and he says, "Mom, open the window." And he says to the woman at the drive-through, "I just want you to know that I'm the biggest fan of your restaurant."
And all of us who know AJ know we could hear that in his voice right now because he's an amazing kid. I just, again, pointing out, if it wasn't for AJ, young Damien is doing it tomorrow in the San Jose game. And Damien came to Superheroes last year and didn't talk. And Kevin proved with AJ that he could do it. And now Damien's going to do it tomorrow. So you got to let AJ know that he was a trailblazer here, right? And I can't say it enough. This is the power of sport.
I guess I would say, like, I didn't understand sound sensitivity before I had a child with autism. I don't know if I didn't think it was real, but I didn't get it. But for Damien, who didn't speak, and now he's speaking, I know a lot of Flames fans are not happy right now and might feel like booing things, but if you can stay until he gets to do it and cheer, like that would mean a lot, because that to me is the victory.
There's a big grudge match on Sunday morning, eh? Are you aware of this?
Yeah, I've heard about that. Yeah.
So the Superheroes' last ice session of the year, and the Flames alumni are playing both the Superheroes team. AJ has skated with the alumni before, and one particular member of the alumni, I believe, helped him score a goal, or he helped. Yeah,
Lanny McDonald helped him score his first goal ever. And, like, I come from the school of Al Mackey. You don't cheer for teams when you're covering them or stuff like that. Like, and I used to try not to get into this here. But when Lanny McDonald was sitting in the dressing room with my son after the game, I sat there and bawled. I don't know if you saw me, but I was, I think you've seen me bawl a few times. Definitely. You've seen me cry a few times.
I have, but
I just sat there
I'm fine. Like,
but I've learned actually now that that's okay.
yes.
Like, just let it happen.
100%.
If you're so moved by something, you're going to cry, just cry.
100%. Thank you. You'll do this again?
Oh yeah. And thanks so much for having me. And you know what? I was thinking about it. I actually think my first radio interview ever might've been with you.
On a show called Just a Game.
I think
up in Edmonton, right?
I think it was 20-something years
yes,
ago.
Yes, absolutely was. 100% it was.
Yeah, so it's great to be back, and thanks for having me.
No problem. Congratulations.
Thank you.
It's so awesome that you're going in, and I just want to speak to your influence on me. I'm better at this because of you. We were rookies together, and I was wide-eyed, and I knew you knew that you were what you were doing. So I was listening to you, and you and Joanne Ireland had a huge impact on me when I was up in Edmonton. So I want to thank you for that. And we've been, friends and colleagues ever since, but for you to go in, you're going in because of the impact, the writing, but also the impact you had on us, your peers. So thank you for that.
Thank you. And I look forward to you kicking me off the bench on Sunday.
Oh, I will do that with a plum. Thank you, Vicki Hall, everybody. Kind enough to join us. All right. Final mile. Speaking of superheroes, join us tomorrow. We're going to be at Parachutes for Pets. So it's not enough that our kids get out and play hockey, but they give out and get back to the community. So we got a bunch of our superheroes kids helping out Parachutes for Pets. We're going to be at Deer Valley. It's a Stuff a Truck event. I think Gavin's going to throw up the graphic here if he's got it in a second. From 1 to 4 o'clock tomorrow, we'll have our jerseys on. We're helping them. We're looking for cat litter, soft and dry cat food, soft and dry dog food, new and dog toys and cat toys. So if you can help us, come down. I would love to see you. 42-21 Canyon Meadows Drive Southwest. Superheroes and Parachutes for Pets. That's tomorrow. If you like, the grudge match does go on Sunday. It's Max Bell 2. 1 game at 8:30, 1 game at 9:30. Believe number 9 is playing. And actually, hockey legend Perry Barazan's playing too. So what a thrill for the kids, eh?
Yeah,
what a thrill for the kids.
Yeah.
Perry Barazan's going to be there. And the last one I want to leave you with, we announced it a couple of weeks ago, Project Ref with Kidsport Calgary. I just want to update you on the success. This Sunday, 10 Kidsport kids are attending a Soccer Calgary referee clinic. They are starting their journey to become referees and also earn a little money on the side. And also 8 new sports have come forward to Kidsport to talk about wanting to get Kidsport kids the opportunity to become officials in basketball and baseball, so umpires, even swimming and things like that. So Project Ref is off to a great start. It's the opportunity to give Kidsport families a little bit more income by having their kids participate and give back to sports. So really, really proud of that. Thanks to Gavin. Thanks to Mark. Thanks to you. The big issue right now in hockey for many of us is the pride issue. I encourage you to go back and listen to the podcast on Wednesday. Bane Pettinger was here from the Alphabet Sports Collective, and I thought he had probably the best take I've heard on this. Enjoy your weekend. We're back with you on Monday. Andrew McBride, yes, that Andrew McBride. It's come to this. I'm now meeting guests in the line at Starbucks. And Andrew McBride's going to come in. Ryan Pike will be here. Cammie Kepke on Wednesday, along with Marco Carducci. And 1 week from today, our big WrestleMania 39 show. Oh, I can't wait to tell you the details of that bad boy next week. All right, everybody, have a great weekend. We'll see you soon.
When there's 2 sides to every coin, then there's a conversation you can join. But I'm an old dog and there's new tricks, and some of my opinions you just can't fix. 'Cause I'm an old man yelling at the sky. I'ma shake my fists at the clouds and cry. Get off my lawn, you snowflake, before I